For our COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard, Jeff, and Mark here with something we think is exciting and particularly suited to the day. It's Close of Business Tuesday, but it's not just any Tuesday, it's Cinco de Mayo. And, you know, over the last 6, 12, 18 months, we've been talking a lot about what's been happening in Latin America. We've had a show on Cuba. We did a show on Venezuela. We've done a couple on Argentina. You know, the region is fascinating. We did something about the new Mexican president not too long ago. And recently, we had the benefit of meeting Alfredo Álvarez. He's the head of the Industrial and Energy Group at EY Latin America. EY is obviously one of the big consulting firms and has, Alfredo will tell us all about it, but what we've come to appreciate is they have an army of people all over the world doing lots of interesting things. And so, again, we thought, what better day to talk about Latin America? Alfredo is joining us from the Mexico City office. So happy Cinco de Mayo to you, Alfredo, and thank you so much for joining us.
Feliz Cinco de Mayo. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, this is also a real day in history because we think for the first time in, what is it, Jeff, 6+ years, since 6+ years, the first time Mike Bradley is not on the show today. And it's not because anything's wrong. It's a very romantic story. He is celebrating his 30th anniversary. And so, Kim, this is total testament to Mike's love and respect for you. He missed the show. Actually, I think if the timing had worked, he was going to patch in. But so special salute to our friend Mike Bradley. Jeff is going to give us the market update. Jeff, what would you tell us about the markets right now?
Yeah, obviously I'm no Mike Bradley, but I will. I'll just share a couple things I was thinking about as we close at new highs in the U.S. stock market today. You know, the S&P 500. You know, it's now up 5% since the start of the war. You know, 10 or 11% year to date. Nasdaq's up 16% year to date. You know, it's just fascinating with the backdrop, and I'll go into some recap of earnings takeaways over the last week. All the while that crude has been up more than 50% over that time frame. If you use 2028 crude prices, up about $10 since the start of the war. So the broad market continues to shrug off kind of medium-term energy risks in pricing. You know, I would note over the last week the vocalness as we went through earnings season of the energy sector leaders in and around shortage, disruption, economic impact. Was highlighted by a number of the large public company CEOs, whether it be Chevron or ConocoPhillips or others. It continues on the thesis or the theme that I said last time I was here was just the degree of concern around the near to medium term impact of these energy issues on just economics broadly. The closer you are to the energy sector, the more worried you are about it. Now, to be fair, many of these businesses have, there's an element of talking your own book. If I'm a Gulf Coast petrochemical facility, I'm going to talk about how disruptive this all is because my stock's been under pressure for years and it's a degree of recovery. The energy sector broadly has not been loved over a long time. So this is a way to, really show the relevance of it. But we tend to fall out closer to what these executives are talking about, where the longer this goes on, the more we worry about, what it takes to unsnarl the backlog, as well as just what degree of damage there may be economically. I think the other notable thing is you've heard through oilfield services season, the domestic oil producers, indications of them, picking up completion activity. That first came from the pressure pumping companies, a couple weeks ago. You had, Diamondback, the largest Permian Basin focused producer, speak to as much today, and we believe there's more of that to come. But it also leads into the discussion today of just other, calls on oil markets, and we're looking forward to hearing from Alfredo as we talk about Latin America.
Awesome. Mark, I was just thinking, since you've been with us, we've known you forever, but you've only formally been with the firm for a while, but you've been to Argentina, you've been thinking about a lot of these other places in the Western Hemisphere. We're going to get to talk about a lot of them today. Anything you'd add going into the discussion?
No, I'm just really excited to talk about this. It just feels like, there's so much that we're hearing about in Latin America, specifically South America, whether it's Argentina, which, as you mentioned, I was just down there with our good friends at Vista, whether it's Brazil or whether it's Venezuela and what's happening there, obviously. And then there's other places that people are starting to talk about. So I'm just really excited to have this conversation with Alfredo.
Well, Alfredo, we're really lucky to have you. in addition to oil and gas, we'll talk about mining and industrials and everything really you're seeing in the region. You know, you tell me where a good place to start is. Venezuela has been the place in the spotlight here over the last few months, but in your practice, maybe give us an introduction to your practice, your team, where you guys are spending most of your time. Like, what's really the draw on your activity right now?
I believe one of the first of all, thank you for inviting. Very keen to participate in this podcast. I will say our strongest practice within my span is mining. Mining has been thriving for a time now, and Latin America is especially blessed with a lot of key materials that are needed for the world. No copper, lithium, raw earths, rare earths, silver, gold. All of those, Latin America is normally even higher than 50% of the reserves of the world. Then I will tell you that the activity of prospecting new mines and doing things in Latin America has been extremely active and hot in the last 10 years. And nowadays, with the prices of the commodities in mining, things are getting quite exciting. And finally, we are seeing the mining companies entering into a route of optimization and including digital. It was one of the industries that were more reluctant to jump into the digital era, and now they are all in, and we are doing very exciting projects with them about security, about optimization, about a lot of things that are needed into the mining process. And oil and gas was a little bit darker in the past, but I will say that the last developments of Latin America have been putting oil and gas back into the prioritization. No? Mexico, unfortunately, has been declining and will continue to decline if we keep those type of policies. But on the other hand, as you already mentioned, the South American piece of the equation is really doing fantastically. No, we have Argentina making very good things as a country, as a mining hub, as an oil and gas hub with Vaca Muerta. Brazil is proving that had endless frontiers for oil and gas around offshore and new frontiers of Brazil. Of course, we have Venezuela, that is these 300 billion barrels of oil waiting to be extracted there with a lot of new enthusiasm since January. And of course, we have newcomers that are entering very strongly, like Guyana, eventually Suriname, even some interesting prospective places in offshore Peru that you will never think about it. But there are very exciting things around Latin America that are keeping us busy. No?
I wonder, Alfredo, we've maybe been listening to ourselves talk too much about this, but so we've talked ourselves into it. But would you say, this is a terrible generalization, but are the countries of Latin America generally looking up and thinking about how do we attract more investment? Is there an opening right now to the United States that hasn't existed previously? How do we replace some of what we've been doing with the Chinese? Like, what would you say? I know it's hard to sum up a continent, but what's the mood, if you would?
No, I believe, yes, we are seeing a little bit of comeback to the center right or right from the far left of. If you saw the continent like 6-8 years ago was fully red, no, all the countries were taking very restrictive and complex policies. Things are getting better for investment. Chile is now getting better. Argentina is getting better. Certainly, Peru has maintained his attractiveness on the mining side of the equation. Venezuela, of course, is one of the biggest streets. And Brazil, even though it's certainly a left side government country, is very open nowadays to foreign investment, and has maintained certain independence, even though with the BRICS they tend to align with the Russia, China, and India stuff. They are normally receiving a lot of investment from the US and Western companies, and they are quite open, complex but open to investment.
Is the the Venezuela thing? I guess it was early January, and at this point we're we can't even remember it, but it wasn't that long ago. What would you say was the such a dramatic turn of events? And just last week, it was interesting. I think Darren Woods commented something to the effect of, we could be amazing in Venezuela, and of course, his famous comment at the White House was it was uninvestable.
Uninvestable.
So what is the takeaway people have from what's happened in Venezuela? Do they think it's going to stick? Do they think it's exciting? I don't know.
Yeah, I believe it's gonna stick. That's my personal opinion, because at the end, the full country aligned pretty well to that gate that opened for whatever reason it got open. And I believe things are aligning. Of course, a very complex route to get into a democratic country again. Maybe we're talking about, I don't know, I have been talking with a lot of Venezuelans about this, but maybe we're talking in 2027, maybe we're talking in 2028. It all depends on very complex things to be solved on Venezuela on different routes. But let's say that the mood of the country and the mood of the Venezuelans is taking this opportunity and grabbing and holding it, and the most complex things are magically moving well in the correct direction.
Could I just ask? I know we hear a lot about the Venezuelans who moved away from the country during the really hard years. Are they coming back? And is the situation on the ground like meaningfully better in terms of just like living and safety?
I believe safety doesn't seem to be extremely complex right now, but I don't see people taking their baggage right away and jumping into the country. I believe they are still some months or years back on that. However, I will say that I am quite amazed about the number of Venezuelans that have talked to me and say that they are willing to jump back. Is kind of amazing, because clearly nowadays we have a shortage of talent in Venezuela, because all the talented people in Venezuela simply left the country. And nowadays it's hard to find good professionals. There are some, but they are hard to get. But I will say that I am quite amazed about the number of Venezuelans saying, I will go back because I have to do this for my country. I have to help to rebuild the country. Then we will see. No, it's a lot of things still to happen. Still, nothing has changed dramatically, but at least the mood is quite positive.
Well, this is a kind of a curveball, but it seems like Mexico has been on a much different path than the other countries. Like, it tried reform many years ago, and then a couple of elections later, it just seems very far from opening up. But you should comment on what's happening in Mexico right now.
Well, I believe Mexico is going in a very unfortunate path from a political perspective. I believe we have took some decisions. Whatever you are, from left or right or whomever, I'm not so passionate about that piece. I believe that you have at least to have basic rules to follow for investing to flow. Unfortunately, the changes in Mexico has sent a lot of signs to investors to say like red red focuses on the economy. However, at the same time, it's a strange mix because at the same time, it's the only country that can provide cheap labor that can cross to the US the products in train or bus, or truck. Then you have all these companies continue to invest because it's kind of the only solution available due to geography for their needs, but at the same time worry about the changes, for example, in the judiciary system that is maybe the one that is tracking more attention from the investors. No, but things continue to move. The country has proved to be resilient, but of course, we are not taking the full advantage of the nearshoring and all the opportunities that were brought by the pandemic and all this complexity on long haul logistic. No,
So
to the US.
this is a slightly random one, Alfredo, but in Central America, I'm trying to think of some of the news. For a while, it goes back a few years, we were talking about Panama and that big mine they had and whether or not they were going to allow mining. That was an interesting one. And then more recently, it seems like El Salvador seems to have become a safe place, maybe a place
haven.
A haven. So maybe talk about any place in Central America. Of course, Panama, we've had a lot of tension over the canal, but what would you tell us about Central America?
Yeah, Panama has their own dynamic due to the canal. They are a reasonably rich country due to their capacities due to the canal. You have Costa Rica that is always been the safe haven of Central America. Quite bad infrastructure in the country, but quite a stable country to invest on. Then you have a lot of shared service centers of US multinationals based in Costa Rica. And then all the other countries normally were extremely complex. The exception now is Salvador, no? That is having this proof of concept, if you want to use that term. That is a guy took the country in a very bad shape of delinquency. Was a very dangerous country. I once went to a meeting there, and I will tell you, from the airport to the meeting, I really felt extremely unsafe, even though nothing happened. But nowadays, you can really walk with a Rolex in the downtown, and nothing will happen to you. This guy has applied very strict and significant rules for delinquents, and things have improved amazingly. Then it's still a lot to be seen. Of course, a lot of questions about human rights over there, and if that route is the correct route. But security wise, I will say that it's maybe today more secure than most of the cities in the US.
Is there a lot of investment happening there that you can tell?
You're starting to have a lot of investment, yes, but considering the size, you will not see huge amount of investment because you are talking about very tiny countries with very bad infrastructure. Then from a highway perspective, they have very poor infrastructure, very poor. They don't have ports. Then it's extremely hard to make things really happening in a very small country. And I will tell you that that's the general problem of Central America. It's always too small to get a scale.
Last week, Alfredo, we had a guest who had written a book. It was about Taiwan and China's focus on Taiwan. But as you read the book, it was a lot about China and just all their ambitions. And Latin America certainly comes up as a place that China wants to have influence, wants to do business, is very, has been, I'll say, thoughtful about how they've structured some of these investments. What any observations on Chinese involvement in the continent?
Yes, it goes bigger when you go southern. I would say Mexico, even though in the last times you have had some investments of the Chinese companies, they tend to be hesitant when they talk about Mexico. It's too close to the US for making a big push. In the south, you see much more investment of China. In the mining sector, of course, is full of Chinese investment. That's the first money that comes to mind when you need to finance a project for mining. Also, when you are thinking about who to sell the product that you are selling, China is normally the number one buyer. The Silk Route of China, this big geopolitical strategy of China, has their own route to South America. Peru has been significantly invest with ports and with some other big Chinese investments. So most of the electricity in Peru is also owned and operated by Chinese companies. Somehow in Chile, not so much. And but the lithium side of Chile is very, and the copper side of Chile is very oriented to China. And of course, Brazil. Brazil has a lot of Chinese investment. All the BRIC kind of business case relies on that. And Argentina used to be, but now is certainly, Milei has certainly moved Argentina more to the US side of the equation on the Latin American perspective. But yes, China is a big player, is a big investor. If you go to, for example, Guyana, that is this new country developing due to oil, everything is done by Chinese companies. I was there, and the construction of the roads are done by Chinese companies. The power plant may be done by a Chinese company. The biggest partner of Exxon and Chevron in the oil field is CNOOC, a Chinese company. Then certainly you find China in all the places.
Yeah, Alfredo, I have so many questions I want to ask, and I'm just so intrigued by what's happening. But even maybe would love to go country by country, but I don't know if we have time for that. But I want to go back to Venezuela. There's been kind of some momentum, it feels like, that's been gained in the past few weeks. In particular, you're seeing, companies like BP, for example, agreeing to go develop gas offshore, kind of an extension of their play in Trinidad and Tobago. You've seen Eni and Repsol making an agreement with the country to go restart or redevelop some oil fields. And then obviously, as Maynard mentioned earlier, Conoco and Exxon are maybe a little more interested than they used to be. My question is, is it starting to feel more investable to go back to Venezuela? And is that sticky, and are these changes going to continue to progress forward?
It's getting better, certainly for all the players. Of course, the ones that were already in the equation is easier for them to simply grow. Chevron, Repsol, Eni, those are the three that were very invested in the country somehow, and now they are more like already there. Then the decision is easier. You're already a partner of PDVSA. You're already there. You already have offices. Then I believe they will have an easier path back. I see a lot of play for independence to jump in, for medium-sized U.S. companies to simply jump in, take a little bit more risk now that the fog has not still settled. You will have some companies that are maybe trying to get better and higher returns, and of course you will have, in my opinion, the Exxons, the Conocos rethinking a lot, and they have said it, but will take time, in my opinion, for them to really put a feet back into the country. But certainly they have 300 billion barrels. It's like,
Right.
even though a lot of that is super heavy oil, rest whatever you want to rest. What do you want to get? 100 billion is still a lot of oil, no?
Yeah. What are your thoughts about, we're starting to hear about some individuals, maybe private, family oriented, trying to invest in the country as well. Just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
They have already. I already hear that Hunt has already signed an MOU. A mid-size Texan company, I can recall the name, has already moved to an MOU. Of course, they're all field service companies. The only one that stayed there is Schlumberger, but the others are quickly getting their back. And I see a lot of momentum. Now, of course,
Okay.
a lot of barriers have still to be
Sure.
put away, but still, I believe it's a huge incentive. 100 billion barrels. No?
And maybe Alfredo, just to try to peel that onion a little further, is what has evolved since January? Is there anything you can point to in Venezuela, or is it just time?
It's time, but the time has proven that nothing has gone wrong, essentially, for the moment. No, it's still, again, there's still a lot of things to happen, but certainly the strategy of keeping the second in command to solve all the barriers that they built has proven to be moving in the correct direction and with the correct consensus of the country. No, then I believe no news is good news. You have already seen some laws to be passed. Of course, it's still far away from what you finally need, but you already have a new reform law for oil and gas, a new reform law for mining. Again, a lot of things are still to be improved, but the Congress is getting consensus to move the laws into a more investable side of the equation. Then things are moving slowly, but certainly to the correct direction.
And two countries we haven't talked about, but for years and years, if you're thinking about South American oil and gas, Canada in particular was home to a lot of Colombian investment. Maybe just Colombia and Ecuador come to mind as two countries we haven't touched on. It's felt like they both were drifting the wrong direction, but maybe that's my own misconception.
They are for oil and gas. They are not thriving. And most of it is due to their own policies, mainly in Colombia. Colombia had a lot of lobbying some years ago about fracking because they seem to have a lot of potential for fracking. Unfortunately for them, they simply stopped the discussion due to political reasons. And Colombia is now facing a very significant problem, that is very expensive gas, because they are not producing enough. No, then you start seeing things like Ecopetrol starting to try to invest into Brazilian companies. No, you just saw the news last week about Ecopetrol moving for Brava Energy. No, then it's clearly showing that the internal market is not working well, and then they have to start moving to try to control players in Brazil to bring gas into. Yeah.
Oh, do you want to, while we're on Colombia, I guess they have an election coming, and it's obviously right there next to Venezuela, and so it a lot of people came across the border. I don't know if they're going back, but what would you say about the outlook for Colombia this year?
It's still undefined. Colombia, even Colombians that I have been discussing with, it's extremely hard to predict. There is a strong sentiment against Petro for a significant piece of the country, but you still have all the things that these type of regimes generate. That is a lot of subsidies to people that will vote for them regardless. then I will say that nobody will be able to predict Colombia until we have a
Mm.
final
Mm.
result. This is like it seems to be very close to 50-50.
Well, we haven't mentioned Cuba yet. And I guess Cuba is a hard one, but my main question for you with Cuba would be if something changed, if the regime, if we had a new government, if it opened up, or however you'd characterize all that, would that really be just a localized Cuba thing, or would that really would that have a broader regional impact?
Cuba at the end was the light that keep pushing the communist doctrine into Latin America. No, certainly the drivers of Venezuela, and very likely the drivers of Mexican political situation right now, and most of the region was certainly uh, influenced somehow by Cuba. Then the importance of Cuba regime going down is not only the island by itself, which is a beautiful island with a lot of touristic potential, but I will say that the biggest effect is the the decrease on the influence in the region for communist type of doctrines.
It's probably an underappreciated effect that the country has on the rest of the region.
Yeah, you can even see the importance of their influences. Mexico keeps putting itself into a big risk in the middle of a negotiation of a treaty, keep sending oil to Cuba, and they keep sending it. Then the only rationale is that they are totally aligned.
Maybe this is a new topic, but I was just thinking about the EY practice as we understand it, and you'll help us characterize it better. But you got to really go into companies. You had mentioned digitalization before, and mining and such. But do you mind sharing with us what you're observing about the work you're doing with companies and how it's changing their processes, changing their economics, like improving their operations? I know you guys are very close to all that, so that'd be quite interesting.
I will say that, of course, EY, historically known by their very strong tax practice, a strong audit practice. Those businesses are still there and will continue to be there for a long time. But now we have a third business that is the same size as the other two, that is on technology consulting advisory in general. No? And on technology side, I will say that the thing that we are seeing is that technology is really getting to the point in which it can really change or transform the way you operate a business. Technology has always been very useful, but you have to invest a lot of money, a lot of resources. You didn't know what to expect, and all these big complex projects. I will say that technology is getting into a place in which you can really drive value easier, faster, and more dramatically. You can really, and we are just starting to see it. But honestly, we have been able to do things that are, in my opinion, amazing, with less effort than expected, at least in my mind. It's just, I believe.
I've got a strange question for you, but I think from the U.S. perspective, you're always, when you think about investments outside of the U.S., the companies always say, well, how much risk, how much above ground risk do I have? Kind of political, regulatory, legal, et cetera. Do you think more and more technology involved in these businesses, is that somehow mitigating political risk? Is it making it, when the more technology you have in a business, does it, for instance, if you had a tax dispute or things that you get into squabbles with host governments about, is technology going to make some of those things easier to manage?
Health, because it decreases the level of exposure you have. No, of course, will never solve the real political problems that you may have. No, a government really trying to find something to hurt you. But I will say, for example, compliance wise, taxes. I come from a tax practice in the old times. Nowadays, honestly, is we're getting close to have computers complying with all your taxes. This is we are really close to that point, and that is more efficient, but also that decreases the possibility of error significantly, and then that softens the discussions with the tax authorities by the error itself. Of course, you will always have this risk of alignment with the government and government policy, whatever. That risk is still there, but certainly the easiestness to get to a higher and almost perfect compliance status is getting reachable. It at times feels more possible.
So I'm thinking about a couple of countries we didn't talk about. I noticed the other day that Uruguay is getting its power from, I think it's like 45% hydro, and then the rest is wind and solar. It doesn't honestly use a lot of fossil fuels, I think. I'm not totally sure. But Uruguay is a beautiful place. It's interesting. And Bolivia is always that place that, it's exotic. We could do Paraguay too, but talk to us about some of the other places we haven't talked about.
I believe Bolivia is interesting, and in fact we are starting a couple of projects there because Bolivia is quite big, and they have, in our sense, a lot of mineral resources, and also a lot of oil and gas. And the government was so restrictive that they really stopped investing, and companies stopped investing in the country for a long time. But now they are just changing to a much more friendly for investment president. And I would say that it's interesting if you are looking for high returns, because, of course, if you go to the other countries, if you go to Vaca Muerta, you already have to pay good money for the acreage, no? It's less an opportunity and more a reality moving into the. I understand that you have already talked with my Vista friends, but Bolivia is more like that place in which if you do things correctly, you can extract a lot of value because it's well located.
Is the Bolivian opportunity, is that a shale opportunity?
I believe shale is conventional, and it's also mining. Again, I don't have a totally clear view because we're starting to retake discussions. They have a lot of lithium. They have the biggest salar in the world, the Uyuni salar. They should have a lot of copper because they are just in the place where Chile and Argentina and Peru are extracting a lot of copper. They share the same geography. They have a lot of silver. They have a lot of. It's a country with a lot of opportunities that has been, let's say, in the dark for a long time, and now things are starting to get there. But of course, it will take some time to understand the real capacity. It used to be a big exporter of natural gas, and now they don't have gas because they stop investing. But
you mentioned Guyana with the Chinese activity. It's such a fascinating country because I think it only has 500,000 people. I think
300. I believe it's 300,000.
300,000 people.
Tiny.
I don't know what the ultimate production of the country is going to be, but it's a huge oil resource. What do you observe about how they will manage that money over time, and how will that become I guess you have Norway on one end with a sovereign fund, and it went really well, and then you have really sad stories on the other end of the spectrum. What do you think about Guyana 10 years from now?
Hopefully they can learn from the mistakes of the other countries, starting from my country, from Mexico. Mexico had times that were extremely prolific oil and gas country, and nowadays our industry is really bad. I have been in Guyana. I have seen them being advised to create a sovereign fund, to start thinking about the future, the population. Of course, they will have a huge immigration into Guyana because it's impossible to operate in Guyana right now with Guyanese. Is like simply out of the spectrum. And simply the country will thrive, certainly, very likely to get into the 2-3 million barrels per day at least, with the things they are investing right now, and with the gas going onshore. They have a lot of bauxite for alumina. They have a lot of they have the correct mix. It will depend on how well they allow the people around them to advise them on the correct things. Hopefully, they follow the Norway's path. But we will see. It's a lot of money from nothing very quickly there.
Yeah, Alfredo, I'd like to chat a little bit about Argentina. Obviously, or it feels like to me, what Milei has done is nothing short of amazing in a fairly short time, and pretty impressive. And certainly, he's put some new laws into place, and we don't need to get into the specifics of those, but it's feels like it's making the country more investable, and I think that there's a desire to bring more foreign capital even in on the upstream side. Obviously, the Vaca Muerta is just this incredible place subsurface. It's amazing. I think everybody agrees on that. The thing that's maybe preventing, or maybe the thing that's kind of holding it back a little bit from a foreign investment standpoint is a couple things. One is cost, because there's not enough service companies down there probably to help bring down costs. But two, closely related to that, the reason maybe some of those service companies aren't there is they're still trying to get comfortable that it is an investable country to be in, and that some of the Malay's changes are structural and sticky, and that he'll continue maybe even to make even more changes that invite investment in. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that, and kind of what's the path forward for Argentina, specifically in the oil and gas world.
It's getting better. I will say that even the productivity and the efficiency is getting better. At the beginning of Milei, they had a problem of a lot of, let's say, dollar inflation due to the corrections they have to make to the foreign currency. That was a real mess.
Yeah.
And that generated a lot of pressure to the oil and gas operators at the beginning, with particularly low oil prices at that moment was tough to make money in Vaca Muerta. Nowadays, things had get better. I will say that most of the operators in Vaca Muerta are already profitable at at an oil of $45-50. With today prices, I will not even say how profitable they could be, but they are getting better. Of course, the biggest question is what will happen after Milei. No? You have the Regis, that is this regime that was created to assure you that the rules will keep there for you forever. But we all know that things can happen in countries. I will say, talking with a lot of Argentinians, and not all executives of big companies, because if you only talk with executives of big companies, you will always get a very particular sense of the reality. I tend to try to talk with the taxi drivers, with the people in the street. I just was in Buenos Aires last week, and I got a base. It's like, because some people is really suffering, no, because it's not an easy move from one economy that highly depends on subsidies from the government to an economy that doesn't have subsidies from the government. But I would say that people at least see that the things are getting a better Argentina, and they are starting to get proud, even in the base of the pyramid. And I am positive. I am very optimistic about Argentina. Of course, the risk is always there, and it's a complex. Populism is a complex thing to battle with, because they normally give the easiest answer to the problems, even though it's not workable. But I'm quite positive about Argentina, and of course, the oil and gas in Vaca Muerta is already getting close to 1 million barrels, and I believe they will surpass the million very very quickly.
Do you think Malay will do even more to make it even more investable, especially in light of what's happening in the Middle East? And I just wonder if he's going to try to do things to attract more capital to the country.
He can always do more, but honestly, he has done a lot.
Sure.
And again, the biggest question is not what Milei can do, is who will be the next Milei. I believe that's the question in Argentina, and hopefully, most of the Argentinians, 50 plus 1% of the Argentinians, think that they are getting better, even without money to be gifted to them daily, or monthly. Then again, I feel positive about that. I believe Milei will continue, and of course, he can still improve laws. But you're starting to see, for example, super mining companies to think very deeply about opening mines in Argentina. And a mine is tougher than an oil and gas field, because
Sure.
oil and gas, you start getting money more with shale. You
Right.
kind of mining is a 10-year investment without any revenue in front,
Sure.
and you have to think pretty well about how sticky is the. And I will say that I have seen projects that are progressing. It's still not billions invested. The only one that has invested heavily is Rio Tinto on the lithium side. They have already put billions into the table, but the other ones are very close, but still not there.
We've talked a lot about mining and oil and gas. I was thinking to your title, industrial and energy leader. What would you tell us thematically that sticks out, whether it be capital flows or trends in the industrial part of what your coverage?
In the Mexican side of the equation, that is the more industrial, I will say, we are still seeing a lot of flows of investment to Mexico. Mexico has a very privileged geographical situation, and of course, that is an easy bet for companies. It's not as easy because it has a lot of complexity around, but let's say it's a no-brainer to most of the industrial companies to invest on. We are seeing a lot of trends on trying to automatize and of course efficient the supply chain, and of course maybe the biggest challenge is in Mexico is right now energy. We have not invested a lot in power and utilities in the last 8 years, and of course, even though we still have a lot of infrastructure, is not a huge problem, but we are starting to see some of the effects of the decrease of investment in power. Hopefully, new investments will come. The Mexican government is trying to find the correct mix to convince the companies to invest into the power grid of Mexico. On the South American piece, has always been a more like industrial for themselves. Is not a lot of exports. Of course, you have exceptions. No, you always have an Embraer producing planes in Brazil. No, but most of the business for South America is more for South American consumption. The only one that is really focused on exporting significantly industrial products is Mexico, and it's doing well. You see the foreign investment figures of Mexico, and even though you don't have newcomers into Mexico, the money that all comers invest into Mexico is still numbers that keep breaking records. No, is the same old bodies that already decided that Mexico was an investable place. Unfortunately, not new guys in the equation, but those old guys are investing enough to keep Mexico busy. No?
Well, I was thinking, Alfredo, we're almost at the top of the hour. You've been super generous, and what a tour of the whole region. I've got another odd one for you. Chinese EVs. This is always the thing that people want to talk about, as you know, it's got so many components to it in terms of the debate. Are Chinese EVs, are they in Mexico? Are they being made in Mexico? What would you tell us about Chinese EVs across Latin America?
Still, in Mexico specifically, they had still not built a factory. They were taking a significant piece of the market at the beginning because Mexico had a low tariffs on them, but Mexico has already increased the tariffs significantly to kind of demonstrate that we are a good neighbor of the U.S. But I will say that they are still sticky in the market. They can produce so cheaply than they are an easy decision for the people that doesn't have a lot of money to buy a car. Now we will start seeing if the complexity of fixing the cars when you have an accident or those kind of things are starting to make a noise into the market, but they have taken a very significant share of the Mexican market that was normally dominated by the Americans, the Japanese, and the Germans. In South America, it's even bigger, no, because you have less tariffs. BYD even had a factory in Brazil. The Brazilian market is full of Chinese cars, some of them hybrid, some of them gasoline, some of them electric. But the Chinese cars are certainly making a trouble to the Detroit and German and Japanese companies. It has not been an easy journey. No, you can see the numbers of Nissan, no, or the numbers of even Volkswagen and all those guys are kind of not having the best years ever.
Wow. Well, this was a fantastic tour of so many things. As you think back on it, is there anything we should have hit on that we didn't?
No, I believe the final remark from my personal point of view is Latin America has some complexities, yes, but this is also a land of opportunities. Is if you're able to have the correct strategy and do the correct things, could be a quite profitable place to do business. Of course, with a lot of challenges and with a lot of specificness around. But I believe it's an interesting place, and it's becoming back El Dorado from the mining and oil and gas perspective. Could be a very significant place to invest in the world, no? and of course the actual environment is helping.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great place to end. Alfredo, we really appreciate it. We're so glad we met you, and we look forward to seeing you in Houston again.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.